Welcome to the show. I am your host, LB Muniz, and this is the Been Awake podcast for better sense making. Interview with Josiah. So you might notice, it's a programming note off the top here, you might notice if you've listened to my interviews before that I don't have the cool little intro that I normally do, which has like clips from inside of the interview. It's too much production work. I have too many things to work on right now, and I want these interviews to get out. I want to be able to talk more people, really push the boundaries of ideas as best I'm able. And so we're just going to kind of have a little chat like every other podcast does. And of course, these kinds of podcasts and this kind of intro is where I remind you that I think a good conversation is like good jazz. And a good conversationalist is like a good jazz musician. You have to know the basics, but you also have to be ready to improvise. One of the things that jazz musicians did, especially at the outset, was teach themselves how to play. Or perhaps better said, there is there are many jazz musicians who, and many musicians who produce and write music themselves who are self-taught. And what's very fun about the conversation that we're about to listen to together is how that can play out in the realm of ideas. This is an episode that's very philosophical. This is an episode where you're going to want to pay attention. You're going to want to pay attention to the things that are being said. So Josiah goes by Sudoku Politburo on Twitter. Go give him a follow. That's really where he normally releases his ideas. It's been a lot of fun getting to know him and then to sit down and talk with him. I don't think I'm doing him a disservice to say he has a very interesting way of looking at the world and a very intuitive sense that things are supposed to fit together. One of the reasons why I started a podcast was to explore ideas. And part of that is because I love learning how other people think, especially when that comes from an unorthodox place. So the beginning of this conversation is a download of his perspective. You're then going to watch me try to put those pieces together, acting as the midwife of ideas, as Socrates was fond of saying. And as always, we end up somewhere interesting. If you enjoy conversations like this, please make sure you're subscribed to the Substack with your email. Subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get podcasts from. There's also going to be, because there is a video component to this, there's going to be a free video available on YouTube and Rumble, so you can go and check those out. Subscribe to me there while you're at it. And for you premium subscribers, you'll have the video right here on Substack. Finally, if you think the kinds of conversations I have value, please consider donating to the Been Awake Project for better sense making. You can get 50% off your first year. Give it a shot. Throw me some bones. Without further ado, let's get into the conversation.
Warning. The following broadcast is not approved by your teacher, university, politician, or government. Side effects may include skepticism, better reasoning skills, liberty, peace, and an escape from the woke.
All right, Josiah, I like to say a little bit out of laziness, but really because I'm interested in the philosophical question behind it. I always enjoy when we start these conversations, these interviews, with a question, and that question being, how do you identify yourself, or what schools of thought do you belong to, or the lack thereof, or however that strikes you?
I don't think I would say I belong to any particular school of thought, but I progressed through libertarianism and classical liberalism and Austrian economics. So I think that was more of a way to identify myself politically and how to relate to my peer group. But I suppose right now my interests are consciousness and metaphysics, and then kind of figuring out how individuals relate to their communities and to their societies broadly.
So still within that. So yeah, I'd say that works for it, right? Like schools of thought. It's not the question itself is not about like possession per se. Like for example, I always like to start the show by saying that I'm a practicing skeptic. It's gone through a few iterations, but that's the one that I think conveys the meaning. Which to me, skepticism is about, not even to me, skepticism is the process by which we put doubt before assent. And assent is the or another way of putting it is inquiry before dogma. But the doubt before assent, and that's why, like you said, you were into consciousness. That's one of the reasons why I've been looking forward to this conversation since we first started talking about it, because this is going to be it's just going to be one of those where it's just sit back and enjoy the ride. This is the backseat of a stranger's mind. This is the higher level stuff that kind of brings us to what I call better sense making. So at least so how the individual relates to the group and consciousness. So with the doubt before assent, so the assent aspect is just this natural capacity we all have in our minds, effectively, to like find and seek order. And in general, humans are beings that go along with things, right? Like what has worked before is going to work again, and so it's very logical to just whatever somebody tells you as being accurate to just take that thing as being so. And if you just take that thing as being so and things work out, you're never in a position to really question it. This is like, those are like those word fillers. Skepticism is a school of thought in that it was an evolutionary function of thought. It wasn't just the impetus to question, right? It was the formalization of that in something that approaches something that's teachable. And that's again why I talk about things in terms of school of thought. I think you mentioned in particular kind of passing through libertarianism, and that's part of the reason why we got connected, is myself going through many of those same things, going through many of those same ideas, and like just kind of working out and seeing the shortcomings of it. You got there a little bit before I did. What was maybe, I don't know how long I want to spend on this, but I am curious, what was one of the first moments for you? And I'll share mine, because it was actually a long time ago. It was just something that took me a long time to accept.
Okay. My first, I'd say March, not quite March, April of 2020 was my first aha moment as far as libertarians, because I was watching the commentary coming out of the biggest names in libertarianism, not Cato or Reason, but a lot of libertarian podcasters, and their reticence to call out the cronyism in the medical science establishment just blew my mind every day when they would say, we got to listen to the scientists and listen to the doctors. And it just kept like how you can talk about regulatory capture for years and then turn around and pump up the authority of the most regulatory captured industry, well, in history, I'd say, really blew my mind. So right there, I was just thinking, these are the people who are most poised to speak on these philosophical matters and this basis for a political thought, and they can't even correctly identify one of the biggest issues facing humanity at this point in time.
You say that, and I'm reminded of, like April 2020. And I remember being very confused as to why everybody was repeating the same lines, right? Like, this could really be a problem. This is, I don't know what to do. We may as well just kind of see. We may as well see. Like, this might be a problem. Maybe some of this, not even that some of this is justified, but that it might be dangerous enough that that like what they're suggesting happens to be the right thing. And I remember I do remember being kind of confused by that, because for me, I was like, yeah, but we still can't have but this is what we're supposed to talk about and like be up against. I will say though, for a lot of us in this space, I don't know that we were paying as close of attention to the medical industrial complex at that time. And it certainly is one of those industries that has been, as you point out, like has the regulatory capture hook, line, and sinker, right? It's just as regulated as any other industry is, and just as in bed with the government as any other industry is. So yeah, why would we trust it? My story, we were just talking about Nietzsche before we started. I can remember one of the first times that I had like a realization about a shortcoming of libertarianism as it existed when I came upon it. And I can't remember the whole bit, but the whole line of Nietzsche, the whole paragraph, the whole section, but the ending was about the exception is great provided it never becomes the rule. And and when you read it, and you go through it, and this is kind of coming back to me as we talk. It was that it's basically that it's very easy to point out the flaws from the sideline, right? And if anybody who watches sports understands that, because you have the guy who will talk about how he could have done it better, even though these are athletes operating at the top of their feet, at the top of like basically human achievement, physically speaking and mentally speaking in many cases. But it's this. But I think that was part of it. Is libertarians in general were sitting on the sideline, and when it's a game, it's very comfortable to be sitting on the sideline, right? You're basically safe. You get to watch all this crazy stuff happening, and you are protected from criticism because, as maybe because you don't have any power. There's no consequence to your actions. There's really no consequence to your thought because it doesn't have the reach that it would if you were actually holding the levers of power. I think what 2020 has showed me at least, and this is why this is kind of why a bunch of us have now gotten together, and there's this whole business of the post-libertarian moment, which of course I wrote about. And we're kind of real. The thing for me that I keep coming back to is, what good are all of these ideas if people don't have, if you're not in a position of authority? Forget the word power for a second. If you're not in a position of authority to implement it, like what good are your ideas if you're not in a position to implement them? If you don't have the money to spend to make them happen, if you don't have the time to dedicate to it or the resources at your disposal. Because it's all well and good to have the best ideas. And again, if you're sitting on the sidelines and you have the best idea about how to run a football team, it's like, great, but how do you actually make that happen? That for me has kind of been the jumping off point into this new space, right? And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on. And you asked about like a theme or an idea, and I said new words. So what I would like for us to do as best we're able is to maybe talk about how we know things in a philosophical sense, right? Like this consciousness idea. And I'm sure it's clear, but like this is a very open thing. So if you ever have a question or whatever, don't feel like I have to run the entire show. This is meant to be a back and forth. Was there anything you wanted to respond to before I maybe try and delve into literally the idea of new words, which is like the worst thing to do for a podcast?
No, I think we should jump right in.
Okay, great. So I thought this might be a good springboard. There was a recent, I probably should have pulled it up, but there was a recent poll put out by, I believe, Caleb Brown, is that his name, on Twitter?
Yeah, that's right.
And he was basically asking, it was an interesting question. And I didn't answer it for reasons that we'll get into, but it was an interesting question, and I'm just pulling it up here because, I usually have these things ready to go, but that it's interesting question about which is the most important branch of philosophy. And I want to make sure I get it right, but I know he had epistemology on there. I know he had ethics on. Okay, it was epistemology, ethics, and metaphysics. And I think ethics ended up winning. And
yeah, I was shocked by that.
Oh, I'm not at all, actually. But but we can get into why. So
maybe disappointed, not shocked. Yeah.
And I could see how one would be disappointed. So those are three big words, right? So we have metaphysics.
Not that I had high hopes.
We had epistemology, metaphysics, and why can't I think of the third one? Because the brain is a fickle thing. Epistemology, metaphysics, and ethics. The thing, maybe that's why, because not that I find it the most boring, but it's epistemology has always been my interest. So epistemology is the study of how we come to know things, or the study of truth, the study of basically how, like, episteme is an ancient word for knowledge. Correct me where I go wrong, or like meaning, and And so the field of epistemology is, what are the different ways in which we can structure the world in which we can like know a thing philosophically. Metaphysics is basically everything beyond the physical world. And also I was at least taught that part of the reason why Aristotle called it the metaphysics was because he was like done writing the physics. So it's like it's one of those things that he kind of named something that became a thing, not necessarily that he was trying to make a thing, which is interesting to think about how history works. Truth, as I like to say, is like truth is like history. The editor allowed it. And then of course, the third one being ethics. And I view, at least, and there's a few different answers to this, but ethics is basically the norms, right? So ethic is about behavior. Ethic is about action. There's a problem, I think, and tell me what you think of this. I think there's a problem with like separating these things out. Not that the question is a bad question to ask, because of course people specialize in different things, but even the poll itself was like, which branch of philosophy, right? And of course the branch implies a tree, and the tree then implies that that they're all actually part of the same thing. Do you want to speak on that?
See, I think my issue wasn't so much that I think they are part of the same thing or the same process, aside from ethics, I'd say.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that they are all involved in the same. Well, I think they're all functions of consciousness, which reflect in part like the environment that consciousness is within. And owing, well, there's a few different reasons for that and manifestations, but the core of it is that our minds are made of physical material, and so they will represent the dimensions or the energies of the material world. And so metaphysics, epistemology, and logic, like those are all existent in the material world without consciousness, if that makes sense.
All right. So
And it might
logic,
not.
hang on. Yeah, let's play with this. All right. So logic, epistemology, and metaphysics, you exist in the world without conscious thought.
Yes. Yeah.
How?
In this way, knowledge. Okay, there's a difference between memory and knowledge. And so in the material world, two physical entities in contact have intimate knowledge of the other one. For example, atoms, when they bond, they have knowledge of the other one and how their energies correspond. But there's only one dimension of energy, so it seems simple to us. And then as they layer more and more atoms to molecules, to then living cells, to then beings, to then animals, and then consciousness, at each level you layer energies or dimensions of energy, and then you get new capabilities and new senses. And so one atom has a sense of its energy, and it attracts or repels depending on, right, so it comes into contact with another atom, and it has knowledge of it, and so it either repels it or attracts it. And so long as they're in contact, like there is an impression of knowledge. And then once it's gone, it's forgotten. And so it's an immediate impact, so it doesn't transfer through time, but time is a result of the layering dimensions of energy. So then once you get to consciousness, you have language, which is, or can represent or manifest as a manipulation of time. Because I can tell you something now, and it does not have any objective impact in the world for 5 years. Let's say. Whereas with atoms, like their particularities manifest immediately to one another.
Okay. And so then to try to reiterate a little bit, because that was a nice little heavy dump, man, coming out swinging. I thought that was going to be an easy one, not necessarily to bat away, but to try and refine. So basically, you would just do you then think that there's a consciousness in atoms, or like per se, or is it that the idea that given that we're taught, so like let's maybe narrow ourselves just to the idea of knowledge, as you kind of did when we were talking there, right? And like how do we know something is the way that it is? And you're saying that you're almost saying that we know knowledge exists because atoms know what to attract and repel.
Right. And they do it perfectly, I suppose. So
Okay.
you could say they don't have a choice, or you could say they choose correctly. So like either way though, their will is I guess perfect, for lack of a better term, or it is always in alignment with logos.
Okay. And so
And then the question
we're
is
back to
like,
logic,
does the energy order the matter, or does the matter direct the energy? And then it's like, well, you can't have one without the other. And so that brings you to the first cause, the metaphysics.
But wouldn't that be physics?
No, it can't be.
Because
matter not in motion isn't matter.
So one more time.
Matter that isn't in motion isn't matter.
Matter that isn't in motion isn't in matter. Really? So is
Yeah,
that and that's
like
because
if you look at an
everything
atom,
has a vibration or a frequency?
Right. There's always background radiation, and so long as there was matter and radiation, it was always in motion, and then everything was always existent, and so there had to be a beginning.
Right. So my question though is why isn't this just physics? Just as a matter, and let me maybe expound upon that a little bit, because
I guess the first cause had to be non-physical, like it had to be outside of this dimension of reality.
Yeah, so like the Aristotelian, I mean, Aristotle has the prime mover, right? Like that's like one of the first philosophical like attempts at rationalizing an existence of like a god. At least, and not that a couple didn't happen before, but like Aristotle kind of rests his entire physics on it of that. So your point then is that there has to be, or rather, it is arguable that even under like the popular understanding of physics with like the Big Bang, you still have a you still have like a moment before things existed. So it's I guess in that way is what you mean when you say that the metaphysics actually maybe precedes the physics.
Yes. Because the question is whose will, and let's just for the sake of argument or conversation, assume that these entities, or that energy and mass, has a will. And so the question is, what will created like that synergy of energy and mass to form matter? It's like what will was involved in that process, and it can't be either of those two. But energy and mass is the only thing that exists in our plane of being.
Because we have to be moving in order for it to constitute anything.
Right. It wouldn't be anything at all.
Yeah, right.
Like not even just like formless mass sitting somewhere. It'd just be literally nothing.
Correct. Yeah, and you can't conceive of what is nothing. Like literally what we're taught, what we view as static is actually dynamic and energy. So and your point was that energy and mass are like the fundamental parts then of
So energy or radiation, and then particulate mass.
I like that.
That sets up like the framework of causality of all logic. And that's the story. It's like that is the first like cause and effect, and that establishes narrative. It establishes sensation, feeling, thinking, and intuition, which are all the characteristics of consciousness.
Okay. Right. Yeah. No. Now I'm tracking with you. It's a different path than I'm used to taking.
Okay.
Yeah. But it's fun because like I
suspected this. Yeah. When you asked what school of thought I come from, I really don't. I pull in everything from anywhere that interests me, and I tie it all together. So
yeah. Right. Yeah. It's no, it definitely works. So but this is where I think the tie-in starts, and I can at least kind of volley back a little bit with that, which is the concept of you're saying like all that, which is very. I'm gonna have to sit with whether or not I think it's metaphysical, but maybe that's just
absolutely up for debate. I am not all these terms. I often catch myself speaking out of terms. So anytime you want to push back my terminology, actually, I really appreciate that.
Yeah,
so.
and that's kind of what I see part of this conversation is, because there's so much like this, like we can communicate very, very well. We can communicate ideas in a certain area, but there's always like a little bit of dissonance, and I'm wondering where that dissonance comes in, whether it's me missing something or just using the wrong kind of word. So I see your point of, and I'm just going to use again like the placeholder term of prime mover, the idea that before existence before the universe, we might say there had to have been something to create the universe.
Actually,
Go ahead. Yeah, for sure.
Okay, I'll throw this in here with the metaphysical. So that all depends on your perspective, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, for example, let's just imagine from the perspective of a subatomic particle, they have no sense of the atom.
Okay, so
right?
I'm gonna stop you because the problem is a perspective of the subatomic atom is, I think, the thing I'm taking not exception to, but looking to refine.
Okay, so if we imagine ourselves as that unit, I guess.
Correct. Yeah.
Right. So if you look at, if I say that the nature of reality is fractal, how would you respond to that?
Now that I understand what a fractal is, I would say that makes sense, right?
Okay.
I think, like, and another way, like, I've been meaning to, like fractal is the idea that things can work at multiple levels, or at least that's one thing. Or if you want to define fractal, actually, because I don't know that I have a sufficient one.
I say that no matter whether you zoom out or zoom in, the picture looks the same.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. One thing I like to not that it's the same, but there's a core, but there is a, like, harmony works too. Cause harmony is actually three different notes that have completely different frequencies that can still, they don't sound the same. So it's not precisely the same thing as looking at the image, but the harmony works together. So there is, we might say, coherence between multiple levels within the idea of the fractal. Go ahead.
Okay,
so we're thinking of ourselves as a subatomic particle.
Right. And then we have a notion of society, but we don't have that. We can't actually imagine like what that means. Like to exist at that level.
Sure. Yes. Mm-hmm.
And so what it's building towards, like, we don't have a sense of. If that makes sense, because we can't perceive,
so we're the subatomic
higher than
particle.
our consciousness.
Yeah, we're the subatomic particle in this example, and society might be not even an entire element, but maybe just a proton.
Right.
Yeah, I actually completely agree with that. Here's where I'm having some hang up in here's not, this isn't where I'm having a hang up, but this is the lens. So, like, you made the point of, like, if we could put ourselves in terms of a subatomic particle, and then it's kind of like, well, we can't, right? So it's not, right. So there still is this there, and your point as well earlier was that metaphysics exist before, basically before humans, right? They precede humans. I'm going to have to listen back to your explanation. You're walking through it, because I think you actually do give a very succinct case for that position. Here's where what I have generally said, though, is we perceive the world as humans, right? And so consciousness, we might say, is this thing that happens whereby we can perceive, we're actually in the process of perceiving the world and, like, reflecting upon it almost. Because other animals have theory of mind. Some animals have, like, very sophisticated social relationships. Like, all of these things had to exist before human beings could become Homo sapiens, could become, like, this creature that is, like, uniquely adaptable to the earth and able to put themselves, and this is the thing, and able to put themselves in the position of a subatomic particle, or, if we want to be a little bit easier, maybe a dog, right? Like, and children will, like, take on different animals and stuff like that. They'll, like, mimic behavior that they see or we see. And animals do this in the wild as well, especially, again, sophisticated animals with social things. But I think, to your point, you would maybe say that but that's exactly the idea, is this is a fractal where we're starting at the subatomic or at the atomic level, and we're working ourselves up to, let's say like a prototypical human tribe, and that the same principles are at play. Or am I misunderstanding your position?
No, I think that's exactly it. And I'd say almost, and this might be a non sequitur to this line of conversation, but it's the process of participating in something higher, like from a subatomic particle participating in an atom. and an atom participating in a molecule, and then so far and so on. Like you get up to, a body of dirt participating with a seed, and then that seed participating in the sprouting of a plant, and that plant participating in an ecosystem, and then it all leads to consciousness. And then there is something higher than consciousness, which we cannot perceive. Just like in the way that to a subatomic particle, there is something higher than it that it cannot perceive, but it has the experience, or you can, if you were to zoom in on an electron and follow it without the rest of the structure in the picture, it would behave differently than an electron that is not in an atom.
Yeah. Wait, okay, because I cut you off. So you said the electron, if it's not observed, behaves differently.
No, not observed. If we were to zoom in to where you could see only the electron but not the other parts, so it's not the observer.
It doesn't. Well, no, but it acts differently, and the movement is different than if you were to look at the entire atom itself.
No. What I'm saying is an electron behaves differently when it is structured in an atom. And so there is an experience there, just like with people. So if we are in a well-balanced family, individuals behave differently than individuals outside of families.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Where'd I start there? I lost my thought.
You're kind of laying out this. So you're basically justifying logic, or not basically, but maybe that's part of what you're doing. Is you're demonstrating the order that exists, whether it wants to or not, in the universe.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's not the case that it starts as a subatomic particle. And you made this point as well, so this isn't like disagreeing with you at all. So it's not the case that it starts with the subatomic particle and moves its way up into the atom and moves its way up into cells, or I guess elements, and elements become maybe cells at some point when they become super complex and dense, and then cells become blah 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 blah, human beings, skyscrapers, Facebook, doomed to humanity. So you're just kind of starting the story at basically.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, participation in something higher. That's right.
Yeah, right. And that was the idea, is that each thing participates in something higher than itself, whether or not it knows that it's doing it.
Right, and it does so because it is imbalanced by itself.
It is imbalanced by itself? Tell me, what does that mean?
Yes, like an electron and a proton. So electrons, they repel energy, and protons attract it. Mm-hmm. And so they are imbalanced until they come to a structure which they makes them more balanced, and they balance all the other constituent parts.
An equilibrium, basically.
Yeah, but not quite. At every level, not quite. It's just closer to it, but not quite. And that's why even fractals, like it's not a circle, it's a spiral.
Yeah.
And so it's like imperfect balance, or it's perfectly imbalanced, I should say, at every level, to keep driving or forcing participation in something higher.
Where did this? So it's interesting to me, because I kind of tend to start with the completed being, right? Like I don't worry so much. I don't worry so much about not that I don't worry about the physics, but like atoms, subatomic particles are of interest to me, but have never been at my particular. Never been my particular. I've never looked that closely into them.
See, they don't interest me at all.
Okay.
No, not at all. Actually, I was I don't even know how long ago now. A few months ago, I went on a deep dive into Jungian analytical psychology. Okay. And so at the same time, so I'm thinking about the mind and consciousness, 4 sides of the mind, the 4 different cognitive functions, each with a introverted and extroverted expression. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking about our minds as I honestly have no clue how the thought even came to me. It might have been in political circles talking about the atomistic man. And then it just kind of struck me. It's like, well, in a way, we are, like, our consciousness is a nucleus. And then our external being and the way that we communicate in the world, all of our particularities that can be known to other people, to other consciousness, those are an electron field. In the same way that atoms interact with each other and come to know each other,
Yeah.
but they have no memory of it. And so that's how we interact with the world as well, if that makes sense. And the particularities necessarily reflect what's in the nucleus, what you are focusing on of your psyche.
Damn, that's good. I'm taking this in. This is very good. So yeah, what I was leading up to before is like I almost, and I think, and certainly based off this conversation, is I almost care about the whole. Not that I care about the whole too much, but I tend to like you're like starting very, very small and working your way out, right? And what's interesting is the way that you incorporate hierarchy into that, right? That each thing is also above, each thing builds upon itself. I mean, I say all the time, and I do believe it. That's what's so interesting about this is like, our brains are designed to create. The way I'll say it is that our brains are designed to create order, and I think what you're pointing out is that no, the order was already there. It's not a matter of creation. Or rather that it was created before the order was created before it gets to your brain, given that we can bring ourselves all the way down at this point with the level of technological advancement to the subatomic.
Yeah. And it's almost like the witnessing or the consciousness. There's an interesting thing where it has the ability to reverse that causality. Mm-hmm. To impact the material that came to form it and to direct that energy consciously. Mm-hmm. Like, so, and that I suppose would be that is the added dimension or an additional dimension of energy into existence. And so my question is, when our consciousness, and something that, well, I guess my main focus is when our how do I put this? What exactly do our consciousnesses participate in? If that makes sense.
Yeah, so it's yeah. Did you want to finish that or?
Not really. I don't know. I've got no answer. I don't know.
What do our consciousnesses? Well, I think okay. So let's take two steps back here, because here's what's very interesting, and this goes back to what I said at the beginning. This connects to the idea of skepticism, right? Because you have just laid out this very, again, it was very, very, very. I'm just digesting it because we've never had this linear of a conversation about it, like as we've kind of alluded to. It's always been in like short spurts where these types of things have come out. By the way, this also connects to the idea of formulating things in terms of school, right? Because you have to move from one state to another, right? If something is going to move beyond yourself, right, beyond this idea of beyond just the perception of one consciousness, we might say for the sake of argument, it has to be systematized in some form or fashion, such that it can be instructed to other people, right? And like we're just these creatures that have a particular knack for allowing that sort of cultural, what we might call cultural transmission. But let's stay on consciousness. So what's interesting about the schema that you lay out, and I just mean that as a structure by which we can orient our thoughts. What's interesting about that in particular is how it does kind of show. It shows where like skepticism comes in, where skepticism has to come in later. And this is an interesting point about it. And I think, and to your, and this is, I've written about this before, so this isn't like I'm like, oh my gosh, this is the idea of it, right? Like skepticism as a school, the ability to question, the ability to do this thing of that you were saying of consciousness, where we can actually look at the same time inwards and down, right? Because we're kind of looking in, but we're also looking down because we're trying to see inside of ourselves, but we're also moving, as you kind of laid out, this idea of what is the thing that participates in us, we might say, right? That's right. So like that's like this unique thing that our consciousness can do. And so like, but that is the questioning. That is the, what is this thing? And that is the skepticism, which inadvertently goes against in a sense, an ordering, which is to say we should find things to make some kind of sense automatically and we shouldn't worry about it. And that's like maybe that's it. What? Okay. So tell me what you think. Do you think that's animalistic then? Right. So actually, no, let's go this way. So I have we've Well, here, we might even be able to get some visual aids up in here. Hang on. All right. So I've talked about my Trinitarian. It's been called Trinitarianism. I'm not really sure what I'd call it. The piece I wrote on it is called The Zenith of Enlightenment. And the idea behind the Zenith of Enlightenment is very simple, right? If we look at one of the things that most Enlightenment thinkers would say that they would or that they would like allude to or like believe, and certainly we see this emblematic in Kant in particular, is we see the idea of instinct being separate from reason, right? And so effectively, as I've said a few times, if we look at instinct and reason and we kind of separate them between these two things, we would if we remove the instinct and keep the reason, then the world is going to be a better place. And they were wrong, right? So I am, by the way, if you're listening to this, you might want to go over to YouTube because I'm going to actually do a little diagram here for the purposes of this conversation. Interesting enough, this is basically what my whiteboard is, because like I just like draw these schemas. And guess the thing I was working out my schema of culture is, guess what I was drawing? A spiral, because I'm trying
perfect.
I'm trying to map out how how culture actually operates. Right. And I'm kind of realizing it's something of a spiral, similar to how when we're talking about a school of thought, geometrically speaking, it's a circle. And, you know, the difference between geometry and algebra is that geometry operates according to the same rules every single time, that's clearly relevant. So we have up on the screen, basically two little circles, right? We have our instinct, or maybe we'll do it like this. We have our instinct and we have our reason. And basically, the Enlightenment people kind of thought, well, if we could just remove instinct from the equation, right? Like this idea of our baser selves, like the primal human being a problem. If we could remove that from ourselves, then things would be a better place. Well, clearly, that's not how humans work, right? Because the 20th century was not a century of enlightenment, and it was a century of great technological advancement, but it was also one of the bloodiest centuries recorded in human history, and we developed some of the worst weapons as a result of it as well. Forget the mind, forget like mass hypnosis, forget the idea of propaganda, like mass social control on a massive scale such that it's never been existed before. Anyway, I think my critique of the Enlightenment, as I've said numerous times, is that they left out one important drive of humanity. And that drive being faith. So I'm just writing those up there for us to look at. And what was so the idea of adding faith into the interplay is we're actually making this a far more complex system of human drive. So this is kind of the schema. This is what I mean when I say like the atomistic, and I almost have issues saying atomistic because you're actually talking about real atoms and we're not talking about like the atomism of the pre-Socratics, which is
we could spell it with a Y.
There you go.
It's in atom and then mystic.
Yeah, there you go. Oh yeah, that's fun. But that actually, ironically, that's probably closer to the ancient atomists. That's the thing, because like before Socrates, there were the atomists. I just started rereading the pre-Socratic. It's a textbook I have on the pre-Socratics. So what's interesting to just point out, and what I love about this, and why I love philosophy, and I love sharing this with people, is that like people were talking about these kinds of things 2,000 years ago. So like this like hyper novel state that we live in today, pretending that we have some great access to knowledge that the ancients didn't, is a lie. And I think certainly the past year has shown how perhaps they never had access to it to begin with. But here's the thing. So and I'll pause and you can tell me what you think, because now we don't just have a Venn diagram of 2, we have a Venn diagram of 3, and it might get a little tough here for me to write this all in, but we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Did I do this wrong? I think there's 7 or 8 intersection points in a 3-way Venn diagram. But then I also had the thought of we can draw arrows in one circle, kind of like going in between. So not even how they intersect, right, or correlate, but how does one relate to the other? And we can also then go, of course, the other way, right? And we can go reason to instinct. So we can go from faith to instinct. long story short, you basically end up with almost 10 different. You get 10 different variables of how you can actually interpret the world if you get to the end of this, and that's not exhaustive, but it is pretty well spelled out.
I guess.
And go ahead.
The only thing I'd have to clear up here, because I'm having trouble wrap my mind around this, only because it seems to me that reason is a modality of human instinct.
Okay. Go ahead and tell me what you mean by that.
Right. So we reason by instinct, I guess what I'd say. And we only reason, like it seems like our reason of today is more sophisticated than 1,000 years ago, only because we layered these abstractions over time.
Okay. Yeah, I see that. Interesting. So what I would have to say to that is don't ruin my stuff.
All right.
No, I'm kidding. No. So I think maybe let me finish the idea, because the point here, my point of the Enlightenment was that they viewed these things as separate.
Okay. Yes.
Right. And I don't view these things as separate from each other.
Okay.
These are forces that exist, like
many such cases from the Enlightenment.
Correct.
Cutting lines over things that they had no business drawing lines over.
Yeah, but it's also one of those things. If you look at the course of human thought, we have a lot of those moments in history. You know what I mean? And we're probably making the same ones today. So no, I think you're correct, right? Like reason, I think like I would view instinct is, I think, well, okay, so let's go back to what you said before, because logic coalesces all of this. Reason is the problem solving that can then get turned into instinct. But the only way in which we can reason is if we have like what I would refer to as a faith, and what that faith is basically the belief that our reason is going to work, which comes back to my formulation of we imagine the world to be orderly, therefore it has order.
Yes. And adding to that, I'd say faith is also, it works on two levels there, because it's also faith that your memory is correct.
Yeah.
Because even to have sense, like you have to compare two different senses of the same dimension. It's like, if I just feel one temperature my entire life, like I felt nothing at all, and I will have no reason, or I will have no understanding of temperature itself. It's like I would have to, so I will have to experience a temperature and then remember it. And then the next time I encounter a different temperature, and then I will have faith, I will remember my earlier experience with that sense. And then I will then be able to locate the two, like in a hierarchy of values, by their discrepancy.
Right. And reason is the means by which you could determine the different temperature. Faith is the drive that says, I can predict what temperature it's going to be, or like within a certain variance, I can figure out what the temperature is going to be. The instinct is, again, maybe it's an outmoded term, right? That's why we're kind of having a conversation about new words. But for me, the instinct is more about those things which have become so known, we might say, interesting enough, going back to how we started the conversation, things that have become so known that they don't have to be questioned in any way, and they don't have to be analyzed in any way, i.e., the Jordan Peterson example of the human retina, the human brain can recognize the imprint of a snake before the eye consciously perceives it.
Okay.
He said in studies that they've done, if you kind of have like the wiggly thing on the ground, that your brain recognizes it before, like some deeper part of you recognizes danger before you actually consciously perceive the concept of a snake.
So we could almost call those necessary particularities of human life, in a way.
Instinct?
Yes. Yeah. So they are things that all people have because they were necessary, I suppose, and everything else is just like a unnecessary differentiation, I guess, until it isn't anymore. So as you go through time, so consciousness is not a necessity of life.
No, certainly not, because most life isn't conscious.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Sentient, perhaps, complicated, perhaps, theory of mind, perhaps, but not conscious in the way that humans are. Right?
Not in all the dimensions that we are.
Correct. Yeah. And this, so I just finished reading Heather Hine and Brett Weinstein's book, which I would recommend to anybody. I find them both very interesting thinkers, and the politics is the last chapter, and you can skip that if you want, because they're political. It's always interesting how people, like, we all have our own blind spots, right? Like, it exists in all things, but it is kind of interesting how they're not wrong, and they're very similar to some of the stuff that you and I might maybe talk about, but it is a little on the basically two Gen X's who grew up in academia, right? You never really had to question the politics of everything if everything generally worked out for you until it didn't, and now they're two of like the bravest people on YouTube insofar as like calling out some of the vaccine hypocrisy goes. I mean, that they're willing to take those stands is a testament, I think, to their character, and also a testament to how people can not change, but grow and perhaps evolve, even if they still have, again, blockers. Where was I going with this?
The book that they wrote.
Yeah, it was
about.
Good.
Okay, what was it about?
It's about evolutionary biology.
Okay.
And so it's this idea of it's about this idea of it's basically giving the meta narrative of evolution in a way that I think coalesces far more so than that. If you're an atheist, you're not going to like some of the things that they say in there, basically. Or if you're a new atheist.
Have you heard about the color blue?
The color blue? I've seen it a couple of times.
Yeah. So around
that's a bad
around
joke.
the Mediterranean.
Yeah.
Around the Mediterranean area, like if you look at the Homer's Odyssey,
mm-hmm.
they call the sea red because they had no they couldn't see blue. Like they had no category for blue. And so anthropologists have gone to this area. I don't know exactly geographically where it is at, and they would show them like 4 squares, red, blue, blue, and blue, and they'd say they're all red.
So they were colorblind.
No, because they told them which ones were blue, and after enough times of telling them, then they could perceive blue.
But the ancient Greeks knew what blue looked like. They used it in painting.
But they had there was no word for it. There was no recognition of it as a different color.
So we perceive it as okay. So the point I'm making.
They could.
Hang on, just as a quick aside, because this is relevant, right? Because we see all of their ancient, all the ancient statues of Greece, and you always think of it as this just beautiful white marble, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's not how they existed. That's not how they look. Turns out this is interesting scholarship over the last 10 years, maybe just the 21st century, that they've started to do this, where they actually have determined that most of these statues were painted. They were all painted, and as it stands, very gaudily. So every ancient Greek, compared to today, or not even compared to today, but like just it wasn't that they were like it wasn't the height of oh gosh, what's that period? Yeah, I'm trying to like just that like the
Greco-Roman
Rembrandt. Yes, yeah, like the Greco-Roman, like Rembrandt, Rembrandt. I think Rembrandt has like very high detail in his paintings. Point being, there's a lot of scholarship right now around how do we recreate these things, and so. Now I'm wondering as I'm kind of telling the story is it actually blue, or are we just putting blue on it because we would think that they would want it to be blue? So what more can you tell me about this? Because I've never heard this before.
Honestly, I really don't know what to make of it. I'm sure I've thought about it and came up with something, but it's escaping my mind right now. But so
it wasn't that the sea actually looked different. It's that there was no word for the color, and therefore everybody just chose another color.
Well, it was all red. So blue and red were synonymous.
Oh, okay. Got it. So it was contextual.
Which is actually, it gets really weird too, because if you look at just like biblical stories, like
the Red
water
Sea,
just meant fluid. And so it gets really strange when you think about blood and living water. And actually, this is just coming to my mind right now. I don't know what to make of any of that.
No. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, okay. But this is, so how do we combat this? Right. Or not even how do we combat this? How do we understand this? Well, that's why I have constructed as best I'm able the paradox of identity, and why I talk about things in terms of identity. I think, and the paradox of identity is this Very simple idea whereby we recognize that for and there's been other formulations of this, of course, but that we recognize that for every word there are at least there's two answers to everything. And you might say, what about 2 + 2? Well, you could answer the question 2 + 2. You could say, I don't know. That would be an answer to 2 + 2. It's not the right answer, but it is a answer. And so in that way, there are at least two answers to everything. But so what the paradox of identity shows us is how we can use words in different ways, right? Which is a very common thing. And we can use the same word to mean different things. Moreover, as it gets more complicated, we can have positive and negative correlations to the words. And you could have a lot of positive correlations to a single word. I could have a lot of negative correlations to the single word. Or we could both have different positive correlations to the same word or the same idea. And word, frankly, I'm using the wrong word. It's actually more of it's more akin to an idea or a concept. And that's this thing of the paradox of identity. So, and I think given both of our backgrounds and the background of most of the audiences, the word libertarian is perfect for this, right? What is a libertarian? Is a libertarian, is the libertarian, I'm trying to be nice. Does the word libertarian mean Ron Paul? Or does the word libertarian mean, I'm trying to think of a name. Nick Sarwark. Who is a libertarian? Right? Like we have this word, we have this concept, we have this almost this identity, this set of ideas, supposedly a school of thought. Is a libertarian Robert Higgs? Or is a libertarian, I'm trying to think of Matt Walsh from Reason? So that's the paradox of identity. And the paradox of identity, by the way, there's no resolution to it. I haven't figured it out. One thing they said in the book, it's a hunter-gatherer's guide to, what is it? Hunter-gatherer's guide to the modern world or something. And basically, but like one thing they talk about in the books is like a paradox, an apparent paradox is like an X on a map, and you got to keep digging. And so I've basically been digging this hole for years and years, trying to see where the bottom is, and I haven't reached it yet. Or maybe better said, I've realized that it's not about reaching the bottom of the hole. It's about who's the one digging, and who's telling you to dig, where. Go ahead.
Oh, I think part of it could just be that when you have social structures or two or more things that trying to think of a way to phrase this. When you have things of different characteristics that have to be held together in some form or fashion to exist, to survive, just like people and just like, I'm going to go here again, subatomic particles, yep. Like there is no right or, and see, this is going to sound morally like some moral relativism, and I can tell you it is absolutely not that, but it can seem like that in a bit like a dialectical frame. But it's a polar flow of energy. So there's one thing that all cognitive functions have in common. They are all either extroverted or introverted. And so if you think of groups that consist of introverted people, the group that represents them or the group that contains them will always be extroverted. Mm-hmm. Because there will have to be a balance there, and that group will then be contained by, or the relationship between the individual and the group will be mediated by repulsion, because the group focuses outward and the component parts focus inward. And so that directional flow from that group is outward. And then if you have extroverts that form a group, or that a group comes to contain, the group will be introverted, or the group focus will be introverted, while the individuals are extroverted. And so then the mediation between the individual and the group is attraction. And so the two groups then that are formed are mediated by, like, they attract each other, I suppose. So like one sends energy to the other and the other takes it and then sends it back.
So tell me what you mean when you use the word energy in this context.
Energy, well, okay, so if you look at an atom, it's just straight electricity or radiation. And then at every layer of being, or at every level of being, you add a dimension of energy. So consciousness, you could say, is attention, But then there are different forms of attention
Mhm.
in consciousness
Okay.
that is higher than merely an animalistic form. Because we can sense, feel, think, and intuit.
Yep. Okay. Anything
Does
else?
this make sense at all?
Yeah, I'm sitting with it, I think, and
I'm
I'm
never
also
quite
trying to
sure.
think of I'm also trying to think of how to jump off, or maybe double back. No, so go ahead and walk me through that one more time. The people listening, I'm sure, are going to get it, but when you're doing the show, you sometimes need to go over it a couple times.
Okay. So there are two universal things, or two universal traits of all cognitive functions,
Right.
of all consciousness.
Extroversion and introversion. And so
Right.
you can have an extroverted individual looking out to an introverted group, or maybe an introverted individual looking out to an extroverted group, but they tend to operate in some kind of repulsion to each other.
Right.
Mhm.
And so if you look at like the left to right, so I think a way to illustrate this would be
okay.
Gamergate.
Yeah, okay, and let's go to Gamergate, but this was something that I wanted to touch before, which is that we have and I think the extroversion and introversion works with this, right? Which is that it's, these are would you say they're feedback effects? Because I also would say there also is a type of, I believe Aristotle talks about this, but there are some things that, and you touched upon this before as well, not cast. Wow, I can't spell.
Oh, that's perfect.
Yeah.
That's exactly where I was going with this, because the way
And
this came to me, it correlates to left and right, or the way we would think of it today.
Yes. And well, right. And I think we can definitely get into what maybe you mean by that and what I mean by that. The point here is not that has nothing to do with even correlation between the idea of extroversion and introversion, or order and chaos, because that's what I wrote up on the screen that he said, yes, that's right. It's that these concepts, in effect, the same way in which light and dark operate, the same way in which different temperatures operate as far as our perception of the world, which is informed by our consciousness, these things don't exist separated from each other. They can't. That's impossible. And in fact, to consider them separable is like just the height of futility. Not even the height of futility, but a bad path you don't want to go on, because it's not going to get you anywhere, because it's not holistic. These things are only understood in terms of their opposite, right? If you don't know what light looks like, or rather, in our cases, as beings, what's the term? Not nocturnal, whatever. People who are alive who are awake during the day, or
DM. I don't know.
It's somewhere. It's like, it's on like the tip of my tongue. Diurnal is the word, or something like that. Diannel, maybe. Point being that without the light, there is no dark, right? If you've never seen darkness, then you don't actually know what light is. If you've never experienced a Midwest winter, you don't know what cold is. If you grew up in Florida and you've never been above the Mason-Dixon, or like had a winter in the north, you don't actually know what cold is. Here's the interesting thing though. You do always have a relative understanding of things, but you don't actually know it in an absolute sense. And so this is another important philosophical concept as well, which is that which is this thing of more, less. And I could put like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. But like those are
Right.
But numbers are a layered abstraction on top of more and less, we might say, because it's a particular thing. We can it's easier to teach somebody, or a child, or maybe an alien, the idea, or somebody who doesn't speak the same language. If I hold up one finger and I hold up a second finger, you don't know if this is two, or dos, or de, or de, or un, de, eins, fein. I don't speak German. Do you know any other languages of saying two to prove the point?
No. And you don't even know that they're fingers either, or that they're not fingers.
Correct.
That they aren't that they aren't two fingers. That it represents.
But if I hold up, because this is an audio primary. So let me just say it this way. If I hold one thing up and I add a second thing to it, you know that that's more. You might call it something different, but more exists. But it is more. And like I can only use that word because that's the word I know to describe the act itself.
I'm thinking about that.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure how you get from one more apple to the concept of more. Because then you might just think one more or one more finger without ever having a concept of like add one. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but okay, I'd say add one is too precise of a characterization. So we
Yeah.
might so if I were to like hold my palm out to you and then like kind of curl my fingers toward myself, right? Like you would understand that might mean come or more in a different depending on the context.
Yeah.
So this
Okay.
isn't even
Yep.
working.
Yep.
But do you see? But what do you know why this isn't working is because we're breaking down. We're breaking down like the basic assumptions we have about things, which is what the field of epistemology attempts to do, right? Is break it down so that we can put it back together again in some form. And I suppose what the metaphysical does as well. I've never I don't know if it's just a particular of my being, but like metaphysics. Well, if that which is unknowable is like that which is unknowable isn't the best, might be the most interesting course of exploration, but perhaps not the most practical.
No, or even possible.
Yes, or even possible. And so who's going to actually take that journey?
Yeah. Like I would hold metaphysical truths are only like you can experience them, but you can't. Like you can know them through experience, but that's it. Like you're not gonna be able to put that into words. It's not gonna be. It's not understandable. It's just like it is a state of. Well, it's a state of perfect love. I'd say, like of perfect, all-encompassing love or knowledge, because it is where you are only taking what you are supposed to take from a given subject and giving what you are supposed to give. Like just like a subatomic particle exists in an atom, taking only the energy it needs and then sending the energy that it is supposed to send, like perfectly, so that the structure that gives it being and meaning and definition, because without that structure, it has none of those things, can continue to exist. And so it doesn't actually know what that means, and it can't say it. And we can't say it either when we are doing those things. But like you feel it, like it's an experience and nothing more. Well, I suppose not nothing more. That's a wrong phrasing.
Right. It's something you can experience, but perhaps not put words to, which is anathema to a philosopher. But that's okay. It's and like, but I think, but if you look at, so I don't look at philosophy as this static thing. I don't look at anything as static. Interesting that you were talking about that as far in terms of matter earlier, right? It's like, and this is why I've taken, in a more practical thing, like why I've taken high exception to very strict rationalism in that it's manifested in certain, we might say like anarchist libertarian circles vis-a-vis agorism, and some other school and a couple other ways, a couple other things, a couple other thinkers as well. But the reason being is that life is a river, it's not the shore. Moreover, I think, and here's something else that I thought in relation to this, is a world in which it takes 4 months for you to cross the ocean. Do ideas actually move slower in that world? And this is actually, you know what? Hang on, let's hold on to that. I can come back to this because this is something I've been wanting to talk about.
Real Jungian stuff.
But I want to touch upon my case of more and less, right? So we have two figures here, A and B. And yes, for the sake of clarity, given that we're having this high level of a conversation, of course, the fact that I'm even delineating A and B without defining what A and B mean is in and of itself like another problem with this, but in turn kind of shows the I think it demonstrates the paradox of identity, because like we kind of have to like I have to be able to convince you that A and B are different in order to convince you that something is more, but whatever. So I have 3 circles in chart A, and I have 5 circles in chart B. In all cases, B is always more than A, and A is always less than B. So now let's just remove A and B from the equation, right? Because I just pointed out it's kind of silly for me to use a letter that doesn't, if we're trying to get to something deeper than even linguistics, right? Which is to say, if I have this many circles and that many circles, one is more and one is less. And that will always be the case. Now, if we add another one, okay, now we have a different comparison to make. It's a proximate thing. It's a relational thing. The absolute idea is that this is what we determine as 5. Just for succinctness, let's use Roman numerals as well. And then this is 3. That's the absolute thing, in that we have this, in that we discovered mathematics as a species. But I would argue that more and less are like relational and exist at what I would call a deeper level, and deeper in the context of like an ocean. So the idea that you're going to keep diving deeper into the ocean to try and see what's there, or a body of water, as the case may be.
Okay. See, I can almost see a case for the inverse as well.
Okay.
And that less and more are. So if you were to sense those two things, like just the quantity, you could feel less and more before you could give a name to the absolute.
Yeah.
Like quantity, I suppose.
Right.
And maybe I misunderstood what you were saying.
No. But I think that is what I was saying. You just you just said it better.
Yep. I misunstood, so I'm glad clarification there. So
yep.
Yeah. I think that's the base. Like the base of consciousness is sensation.
Yeah, and so here's the thing. And sorry to cut you off, but here's the thing, right? This more and less participates in 3 and 5, participates in, we can increase this, maybe we go like mathematics or something like that, or addition, and we can actually move up a chain that way, the way that you kind of delineated from the subatomic particle upward.
And then it participates in intuition, in imagining all of the things that could be 3 and all of the things that could be in 5.
Yeah. And that is the abstraction that is mathematics.
Yes.
And math is the closest thing to truth that we have, right? As a skeptic, I don't know if truth is ever knowable, but mathematics is the closest thing I think we can come to it. And I would, and to draw the point, and I'm sure you would agree, like modern modeling isn't per se mathematics. Right, like when you're making assumptions, it's not a mathematical equation the way I'm referring to it. And like a sophisticated and like a sophisticated statistical model.
My knee-jerk response is to throw all quantifications in the garbage in the dumpster and leave them there. So I'm trying to put my priors aside for a moment to think about that thought.
Well, go ahead. Well, go ahead and tell me what you would normally say to something like that, because maybe I don't think we're that far off from each other. So, what would be your clarification?
Yeah, I don't think it's wrong. Like just the idea that mathematics is the closest thing we have to truth. So, like, I don't necessarily take issue with that claim. It's just my general disposition to quantifications is just like only absolutely when necessary, I suppose. Yeah. Like as a way of structuring society and the way we go about our lives.
Correct. Yeah. Notice I didn't use the word scientific.
And so I think that's exactly right, because we're not supposed to actually, I think the pursuit of truth itself can be a force of entropy for social structures. And so I think a lot of it is just focusing on experiencing truth and not pursuing conceptual truth. That makes sense? Like, so it's...
Give that to me again. Yeah. I think...
Okay. So it's not searching the concrete conception of truth so much as the experience of truth. And so I think there's a balance to be found there.
Yeah. So you said the concrete, it's about, well, that's, so here, okay. So here's what I've said for a long time, right? And I use this a lot. So like, what I like to say is that I set aside the idea of truth a long time ago. Instead, I endeavor to find what is. And I think what is, you're going to love this, exists somewhere between expression and understanding.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's perfect. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, and that's and so like, And basically, and the reason why we embark on this journey is because everybody claims to know the truth, especially in our hyper scientific age. But and I say especially, but I have to control myself, because of course, because everybody has always thought they have a special claim to truth, right? Like that's kind of, I think, part of being human. Everybody's got to feel like they have like this one particular like good thing that they know that other people don't. Or maybe I'm betraying something about myself.
Yeah. I think I really don't know. I can't speak to that.
I think
you might be right. I don't get the sense. Well, even I suppose you're right in a way. Like there's always some realm of thought or truth like that people hold on to, either about themselves, yeah.
Well, given that I think we both have an interest in politics, let's use a very easy one that people talk about. Like most people think that the people in charge know what they're doing. Like most, or maybe better said, because that one can be taken apart a little bit, that the people in charge have their best interest at heart. Like the average person believes that, not in part because they're told, but also because they need to. Look at what we're seeing. So look at what we've seen since 2016. Look at what we've seen in the way people react to the world and the way people are being torn apart. In part, it's because they don't know what they're doing, and in part because they don't have our best interest at heart. But people have assumed, the average person, the member of the herd, right? Just the person who, the honest to God, and I don't like the good person who is just interested in earning a living, raising a family, contributing to the perpetuation of the species, right? Most people are blips, or most people are grains of sand lost to the tide. And like I just recently went to visit my grandparents. I took my aunt, who hadn't been there in a while, and she doesn't drive, and so she had kind of asked if I could take her, or she didn't ask, I offered, because she was talking about how she wanted to go. So I took her to see her parents, my grandparents, and it had just snowed, and it had just snowed in like the Chicago area, and they don't have like a headstone that comes out of the ground, right? It's just a flat one in the ground. And so we get there, I get to the area where I know the graves are. It's been probably 10 years since I've been. And it's like, and so like now I got to find the headstone. Well, they're all covered by snow. So I eventually get to this point after I'm literally like, I'm like in this weird way, like grave digging, right? Where I'm like looking for the headstones. You can kind of see a depression in the snow, and so like I'm like scraping it out with my boot, kind of trying to wipe it away, see what the name was. Well, it took me a while to find it. I'm sad to say I found other family members before I found them, because a number of us are buried there. But it was like I basically got to this point where I'm like, okay, looking at a headstone, finding the name, looking in the database of the cemetery, seeing what that location is, and then trying to longitude and latitude my way to find the headstones I needed to. Part of the reason, by the way, that it took so long is that a groundskeeper drove over it in like an ATV or something like that, or a gator. And so what I thought was a path was actually just headstones that had been driven over.
Oh, wow.
So that was part of the reason of why it took a little bit longer. But to the point is like, I just found all these people, all these names of like people who existed at one point in time, and they lived for 60 and 70 years, and they had children, and they died, and I never knew them. I don't know their story. I might be able to glean a little, turns out some of them were mothers and fathers because it said so on their headstone. I can remember being struck by the same thought when I went to Greece for the first time. It was my first time traveling internationally, and I'm like, and I've flown my whole life all over the United States. I moved around a lot. I have family all over. But I can remember it was a very distinct thought, hours before I walked the same ground as Socrates, mind you. But like, I remember being struck by the thought of, this place has existed my whole life, and I have never been here. I have never interacted with these people. They don't know whether I exist. I have never even had an impact on anything that's happened in this place, right? Where I might be able to make some argument that I have had some kind of impact in my home country. That most people are like that, there's nothing wrong with that, right? And in fact, you have children, right? If memory serves, or
Yeah. Yep.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't, but I have cousins of mine who I'm very close with who have children around the same age, and I was just talking to one recently, and he listens. So yes, I'm talking about you. But like he was just talking about how his almost 1-year-old, who's my goddaughter, how his almost 1-year-old now, she like when she hears the front door unlock, she like comes like scooting her way up because she's not quite walking yet, and just like da 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 da. And he said like every time that happens, and I'm sure, and maybe you're better at speaking of this as an actual father, but he's like every time that happens, it's like my heart just melts. And as I'm listening to him talk, I'm like, yeah, that just honestly, that just sounds like the purest understanding of what joy is. And to think, and this is tangenting a little bit, but it's, of course we can all connect it, but and to think that so much of our modern day is telling people not to have children or to wait or to not have too many of them, when I've seen firsthand just the joy, like just the unbridled joy of watching this little thing like become conscious, become human, right? Like actually start to understand the world. I don't know, that it's that there's like that joy exists whether you are a famous celebrity who's remembered for something, or whether you're just a headstone in a graveyard at some point
yeah.
that somebody comes and and brushes off every now and again and puts some flowers up on.
Yeah, yeah, and that's the experience, and there's no record of it. Like, there's no conceptual, concrete record of that experience, of that joy. But it's very much real and experienced. And I think there is, like, I don't think we can really know the impact that our lives have, like, while we're living them. Like, we won't know.
Yeah.
And there's a way in which, like, even things that we don't think impact the world. I guess the way I'd say this, when we form groups as people, like there's something, and I understand I'm jumping away from the topic here that you just brought up, which I had some good thoughts on, but now I'm when we form groups of people, there's a way in which all of our interactions give off an experience and an action. So the way you put it was expression and
understanding.
Understanding. And the way I formulated it in the past is that it's action and then experience. And so I think they're very much the same, like they're analogous ways of saying the same thing. But it's so we act in the world, and all of our actions are representative of the way that we structure our minds. And that's not the right word, because we can't really structure our minds, but the way that we orient.
It's funny you say we can't structure our minds. We also can't form groups in some respects. I think we're the only humans in many. Here's the interesting thing as it relates to identity, right? I think we're the first humans really who have ever been able to form their own groups.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Right? I mean, think about like the odds of, like, literally we don't live geographically proximate. We're closer than some other people, right? But like we're separated by like what, 300, 200 miles probably right now, give or take.
Yeah. And without the internet, I would never have even probably known your name.
Perhaps, like, and more to the point, even though we were listening to a lot of the same people, we didn't know each other's names until like a few months ago.
Yeah. Yep.
Right. So to the point of where, like, so we might have just been like that one guy in a group of people, most of whom weren't interested in like a higher level thing, like a higher level understanding or anything like that, right? Like I'm the guy. I've always been the guy that people are like, all right, yo, LB, take it down a notch. Like, you're up here, I need you to be down here. Like, I need you to chill out.
Yeah.
I've told
like, dude, you're just using those words to sound smart. It doesn't even make sense. My God,
that is one of my favorite. I used to get so upset. Now it's one of my favorite. I take it as the highest compliment in the world.
I used to think, man, I really am dumb, but I'm like, shoot, I don't know how else to say this. I'm just trying to put it as simply as possible.
I remember in a college class I took once, whereas like the girl said, you should try to use less big words.
Oh no.
I almost that exact formulation. I'm like, and she wasn't wrong, right? But like, she also wasn't right. It was, it's but to my point is like, so like this weird accident of the world that we find ourselves now is that like we can actually interact in a way that, we wouldn't have. Because here's the other thing, right? Neither of us are like in academia. even though we're having what can be considered a very academic conversation right now, in the best sense of that word, right? Not in the negative sense of that word that we might say. Like, this is a very highly philosophical conversation we're having at the moment. And yet neither of us our paychecks are signed because we're philosophers. Although if you want, beenawake.com/donate, Cash App, Been Awake, if you want to support the mission. But, but to the point is, like, and yet we're able to talk, and so like there's this new synthesis that can happen because of it, right? Whereas in the past you might have only seen this pop up with one, maybe two people in a given tribe, or dare I say group, which brings me back to the point of, can we actually form groups as humans, or are we actually born into groups? By the way, this traces to identity, because because we have our identity has both a deontological and an ontological sense. Deontological is, of course, like something that exists like a priori, so before experience, and then ontological is the state of becoming, or posteriori, like, with experience or empiricism of some kind. Again, going back to the idea, for right or wrong, some people would say wrong, some people would say right, we are the humans who have more of our identities than ever being made up from not even an ontological sense in that we are discovering them, but in the sense that basically, they cut your anchor and they told you, don't worry, the current is going to take you where you need to go. Even though anybody who knows anything about sailing knows that that's not the truth. The current will take you where it wants to go, not where you want to go. That's why you need sails.
Yeah, it's a great point. It's an added dimension of energy, I guess, that current. And then we were given no oars or rudders, nothing to direct where we're going through time.
See, I would say that they took, again, I would make the point that they took the oars and rudders away from you. Or rather, they're telling people don't. Or rather, they're telling people when you got
the bumper rails off the lanes.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, or they said when you like ran aground on the beach and you're like, oh, you know what, maybe I should like, or you ran aground a beach, you're in a river or something like that, and you're like, you know what, maybe I should take one of these like trees and use that to like help me navigate the waters better. And they basically are telling you like, nope, don't do that. Just get back in the boat. Don't think about the waterfall at the end of this river. And that's effectively, I think that's where the elites have us at the moment, or have the mass herd of humanity. The more and more I look into these things, especially as it relates to just like basic stuff, as like having a family, like creating that fractal, as it were, and just the idea of isolation. Here's one for you, because I see you thinking too. Here's one for you. I'm not like super big or anything, but I'm a little on the heavier side, right? Like I have like a gut, and I don't work out as much as I should, but I'm fairly active. But it's like, when I'm with people, I don't eat a lot. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I can have like a normal meal and stuff like that. But when I'm by myself, and this is like just a personal thing I'm kind of sharing to you and the audience, is like, but when I'm by myself, I have a tendency to binge. And I kind of and I like noticed that about myself, of like, I'm literally just filling a hole right now because I need to feel something, because I'm isolated from people. I travel a lot. I'm in hotels kind of by myself all night, all the time. I'm not a big drinker. I'm a little drinker, and I don't like to drive drunk given how much I have to drive for work. So like, I don't want to like, and it takes a bit for me to get drunk. So, so it's like just going to a bar is kind of like to the point of what we're saying, of like, sometimes it's hard to interact with like a normal, with like the everyday person. I don't like get that stuff. So, but the point is that I noticed that about myself, of like, isolated. How much are we encouraged to be isolated these days? Forget the family stuff, the whole like lockdown stuff, and the isolation metric for that.
Yeah, I think that's actually really interesting, because I think the market has done the market has played a very large role in creating that environment. Because the market,
you really want to have this out at an hour 25? Fine. What is the market, Josiah?
Well, the market answers the question: what would the world look like if people's desire for X thing was fulfilled? And so people, and then the market provides that thing that people want within whatever is physically possible. Like the market provides that thing.
Yeah.
And so the market profits off of answering that question. So the more complicated that answer is, the less the market profits. And so over time, as the market gets more and more power, they will work to make the questions more and more simple.
Yeah. Sure. So
Right.
I think, and I'm following you. So I think how we define the term matters, and that's where I think part of that's where we might have differences here.
Okay. Yes. Yep.
Yeah, because like for me, what I view, because I completely grant that what you're talking about is a function of markets, but I would say it's a market without limits. Or it's a market that acts as, or it's the belief that there are no limits creates a market in which you don't focus on answering the complicated problems. So let's back up 2 seconds.
I would say even a market with limits, I'd say the market gets rid of those limits in short order. But I don't disagree with you at all.
Yeah,
so long as those limits are in place, like you're all right.
Right. I think again, I don't know that it's. I think maybe we might say that to push to find new areas on which to profit, the market pushes the limits. But the limits, but like that's not exactly what I mean when I say that you need limits, because that's an individual thing. That's something that needs to be transmuted, and effectively through things like through the monetary policy of the last 100 years, right? Like easy money, fractional reserve banking, we've basically been able to hack the market function to live off of tomorrow for the sake of today. And we're dealing with the consequences of that 100 years later.
Right.
Because let's use an evolutionary frame to try and understand what the market is. Like the market is people bringing things that they put together to see if other people want them. Right? Like just the basic idea of a market, right? Like I have good A. Would you like to buy good A, or would you like to trade for good B? And that's
it's almost like the polarity between extroversion and introversion.
Sure. Yeah. Because the market is, in the Austrian sense, it's precisely right. It's just individuals interacting. It is a force that exists. Where that force goes, where that energy goes, what that energy is put into is up for debate and interpretation. It is, as the Austrian school talks about, it is value free. There is nothing good or evil about the market, just like I would argue there is nothing good or evil about gravity. Now, that being said, gravity is really good because you don't fly into space, and it's really bad if you jump off of a building. I would argue we are the thing that makes something good or bad. And where the market is different from gravity is that the market is a human innovation, is like this really complicated societal thing that we've managed to accomplish.
See, I don't think I disagree with any of that, but I've got some questions about the nature of something that is value free, like the possibility. Like, can something actually be value free? Like, so the market is involved with our desires.
I would
say. Can it really be neutral with regards to human desires?
Well, we have the neutron, don't we?
We do. But without the limits of an atom, a neutron becomes a proton in a certain amount of time.
And without the limits of, like, let's say
a morally
structured society, the market becomes something that rewards, like, I don't know,
ever more instantaneous
the
gratification.
market, yeah, exactly. Yeah, and so here's the thing. Evolutionarily speaking, right? Instinctually speaking, like we are programmed to want things like, like salt and fat and sugar. Right. Like, and to the point is in this hyper novel age, and the hyper novelty term comes from the evolution, the Heather Hine and Brett Weinstein's book. But like the hyper novelty of our age is that basically, again, it's hacking our biological substrate, right? By putting salt and sugar into everything. because our
Right.
bodies in evolutionarily speaking, historically speaking, have craved that because we've always had so little.
The funny thing is, we could do that, and it would be all right as long as it wasn't artificial
Sure.
or industrially processed, like vegetable oil. It comes from the origins are the 40s or the 30s, 50s, sometime around there. It was cottonseed or cotton producers. They had all the cotton seeds left over, and they were like, I wonder if we can do something with these cotton seeds. I'm like, oh, yep, we can get cottonseed oil.
Yeah.
And that's just snowballed outwards. And then they put it in all the food. And so our desire for fat is fulfilled in like a lot of cases by a fat that is absolutely toxic to the human body.
Damn. Ain't that the truth though? Because it's these are the times you go ahead.
Oh, I guess that's what I was. So the market isn't exactly. So in that sense, the market isn't value freaks. It serves itself, like at the expense of. So I guess, yeah, it hacks. So it hacks the human desires and then fulfills them in
I would
whatever
again
way
say
is
that
most
the
efficient.
people hack the human desire. The market is just the mechanism of like the market is just the mechanism. That's again the point that I make, right? It's not that.
Okay.
Yeah, it's that it is the methodological individualism of Mises, not the poorly constructed categorization of individualism v collectivism, right? Like the methodological individualism of human action of Mises in the context of human action understands that would put basically, like I said, the market as a force with individual actors within them. To the degree that the actors are rewarded for bad behavior is an avenue worth exploring, right? And when we actually look down those, what do we find? We find regulatory capture. We find, even when the dangers are observed, them paying off people in positions of authority so they can maximize it. Basically, somebody deciding, getting it in their heads of that this is the right answer for things. So I write a law about it, and now 100 years later, we all think that it's good to just eat bread all day.
But are they not? Just I don't disagree with all those things about regulatory capture, but the people that regulate those industries or the lawmakers, aren't they just selling a complicated system of marketing to those firms?
Sure, in part, but the regulatory state in that it exists in that it exists today is only an invention of the last century.
Oh, absolutely.
But and separate from
not even quite, because even going back to the medieval ages, like you had markets and they could only be within 1 day's ride. Or
I was about to point out like the Byzantine Empire, which like basically fell, like was crushed under the weight of its own bureaucracy in the end.
But that's a good point though, because back then like the regulations were so set in stone because you couldn't just change things easily. Like nobody would they were a lot less.
Well, and here's another one. The elites of today have been able to here's one way I'd put it. The elites of today have been able to extend their natural, like what would be considered their natural reach and their natural lifespan. And I don't mean lifespan in terms of their lives themselves, but in terms of the ideas that animate them. Like again through things like the fractional reserve banking and like basically leveraging the future for the sake of today. And you can even make like a more eco case about this, right? And talk about it in terms of like mining operations and stuff like that.
Oh yeah.
Right. And to the point, like, and this is the Jordan Peterson point of, turns out the best thing you can do to make a country get cleaner is to let it get dirty first. Because once it gets really dirty and everybody starts to get a little bit richer because of that, they suddenly want things to be cleaner. Now, you know what that makes me think of? The thing you said earlier about when I said equilibrium and you say not quite.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So like so that's why I think the folly is like expecting to reach some kind of like perfect equilibrium and things.
Yeah, not quite. Always not quite. Yep.
Yeah. And I think not quite is the cry of the skeptic as well. Because it's like, not quite. We can refine this idea. And I think that's what's been fun about this conversation. We've hit an hour 35. I could definitely keep going with this, but I feel like we should leave it here for now, and we'll have to continue this conversation another time.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, LB. It was fantastic, and I would
Yeah.
absolutely love to sit down again with you.
Super fun. I love it. Why don't you tell everybody where they can find you?
Oh, right now I'm just on Twitter at Sudoku Politburo. So follow me for some, all over the place takes.
Yeah, no, love it. And I've enjoyed having access to your mind. I'm very happy that I've gotten to share that with my audience at Been Awake. And if you guys don't know already, if for whatever reason you're a fan of Josiah before me, that's cool, all good, no big deal. It's fine. I am the mind behind the Been Awake Project for better sense making. You can find all of my work by going to beenawake.com and following me on all social media at the LB Muniz.
If you like what you heard today, go to beenawake.com to subscribe for future updates. My name is LB Muniz, and I am not one with the woke.